Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff live here on Giants.com, YouTube, as well as the mobile app. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. In multiple ways, you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You could also interact with the two of us on social media using hashtag GiantsChat. He is at Matt Citak, one word. I am at Lance Medow, one word as well. Last name, Medow. And the archive of this show, our entire podcast network, is available on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. And we are broadcasting from the Giants podcast studio. It is presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. So a lot to tackle over the course of the program. We'll get into some takeaways from the John Harbaugh introductory press conference, as well as some takeaways from trends for his offensive and defensive coordinators in Baltimore. But Matt, let's start off the top with some news related to at least the Giants and the structure of the organization. And this is the only thing that has been at least official from the team perspective. I want to make that clear. I'm sure a lot of you have read about other perhaps changes within the organization. Nothing official from that standpoint from the Giants, with the exception of this, that head athletic trainer Ronnie Barnes is going to have a shift in his role within the organization, and he has been an absolute staple of the Giants franchise for a very long time. He was with the team since 1976. He has been the head athletic trainer and senior vice president of medical services since 2009. So he's staying with the team. He is just going to have a different role, and they're going to bring in a new head athletic trainer to handle those responsibilities. And this is what happens, Matt, of course, when you have a new head coach, especially with the resume and influence of a John Harbaugh. And he at least alluded to this during his press conference, that there were going to be changes. So I don't think this is necessarily alarming, but I think what's also important for Giants fans and individuals that follow football is there are a lot of individuals that have been tied to this organization for a very long time and have put their stamps on this organization in terms of helping this team win multiple Super Bowls. And there's also, while once again, Ronnie Barnes is staying with the team, but there is the human element to this aspect of change in addition to what may be transpiring from a football X's and O's standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talk about this anytime anyone in this organization, sort of loses their job. And, again, you guys know, I talk about it all the time. I'm on Giants Twitter. I basically live there. So I see.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but go ahead. Yeah.
For my mental health, I'm not sure. But I see all the reactions, and, it hurts me a little to see like so many people celebrating the, people losing their jobs or having position changes. Like, it just, for us, we're in the building. Again, as you mentioned, it's the human side to it. Like, we see these guys every day. We know them on a personal level. So in that sense, it's, it's a little sad to see. Like, I can understand from a fan's perspective outside the building. Like, I can understand, being happy about changes being made, and I'm not saying you necessarily shouldn't be, but we're certainly not going to sit up here and celebrate anyone losing their job or having significant title changes, because especially someone like Ronnie, who is amazing at what he does. Like, there's a reason why he is in the Trainers Hall of Fame. Like, he is known and respected around the league and known to be one of the very best at what he does. So just putting that out there, like, we're not ever, and I've said this before, I said this when, Brian Daboll was fired a couple of months ago, we're never going to sit up here and celebrate anyone losing their job. That's just, it's not what we do on the show. And I know you kind of touched on it. I just want to make it very clear, because as soon as we started, the phone banks filled up very quickly. We're not touching anything about reports of anyone else, until something is official, until you hear it from the Giants officially. We're not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So I just want to make that very clear before we dive into calls later and anything about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Matt, just a few other items in terms of Ronnie Barnes. You had mentioned his accomplishments in the Giants Ring of Honor. And that's a unique circumstance for somebody that has not played or coached. He was the first African-American head athletic trainer in the National Football League, so he broke down several barriers. And, I mean, just to put things in perspective, we're talking about an individual that is pre-Phil Simms and Lawrence Taylor. So if that doesn't put things in perspective in terms of what he helped build foundation-wise on the medical training side, I don't know what does. But clearly, he is going to stay with the organization. They will bring in some new blood on that side. And this is what happens when you bring in not just a new head coach, but, and this will transition us to some other topics that we wanted to delve into, Matt, but John Harbaugh is a true CEO. That's not to say that the Giants have not had CEO-esque head coaches before, so I don't want anybody to misinterpret my words, but Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator, and when he was hired by the Baltimore Ravens, it was really unheard of for a special teamer to get a head coaching gig in the National Football League. So kudos to the Ravens for taking a chance with him, and the rest is history. But what he did, and I'm going to get into this because I've been computing some data in terms of his coordinators, John didn't call plays. Whether it's offense, defense, special teams, he empowered his assistants. So that's what I mean by him being a true CEO. And he oversaw every aspect humanly imaginable within the Ravens organization with the help of a legendary general manager in Ozzie Newsome, who was there when he first took over, and then Eric DeCosta, who worked under Ozzie Newsome, who is the current general manager. So Harbaugh saw everything: medical, X's and O's, marketing, business aspects. He's the type of guy, Matt, that is highly invested in things that maybe to the naked eye don't seem to have an impact on the daily grind of what you do on the football field, but he realizes those things behind closed doors, they can roll over to the football field. So that's why it's not surprising at all that some of the early moves we're seeing, nothing confirmed on our part from reports and from Ronnie Barnes, is not necessarily X's and O's, is what I'm getting at. And that this is his blueprint of what he saw firsthand in Baltimore. And I would expect that he's going to have his fingertips on things that maybe other coaches didn't necessarily, I don't want to say they didn't care for, but they didn't necessarily maybe invest in on a daily basis that he is more in tune with.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you bring in a coach of this caliber with this success that John Harbaugh has had and the track record that he brings, you want him to bring some of the ways from his old team with him because he had so much success in Baltimore for nearly 2 decades. So from what I was saying before, I'm not saying necessarily that it's a bad thing. As Harbaugh himself said the other day, change can be good. As Andy Reid told him, change can be good.
Yeah.
Speaking of Andy Reid, I think a big reason why John Harbaugh is such a successful CEO type of head coach is because he learned under Andy Reid for nearly a decade. He was the special teams coordinator with the Eagles while Andy Reid was the head coach there. Andy Reid is widely regarded as one of the best head coaches in the NFL, has been for a very long time, and that was like one of his biggest mentors outside of, his father, who obviously has his own very successful track record in the collegiate ranks. But yeah, look, he's that CEO type head coach that, as you mentioned, was there front row to see how things were done in Baltimore that led to a ton of success. Was it 6 division titles, a Super Bowl, 4 appearances in the AFC Championship game? The level of sustained success that was discussed 4 years ago when, Joe first took over, the thing that the Giants were striving for, that level of year in and year out sustained success. John Harbaugh had that in Baltimore. So for him to bring over some of the ways that he saw firsthand worked there, bring it to this organization, that can be a good thing. Hopefully will be a good thing. Because again, if the Giants can mirror even just some of the success that the Ravens had for the last nearly 2 decades, then I think we're all going to be very, very happy about where the direction of this franchise and this team, the way that their team will be moving forward and the success that this team will hopefully be able to achieve in the coming years.
It never hurts to have an outside perspective. And even though I would say when he became the head coach in 2008 in Baltimore, that franchise was in relatively good shape in terms of some winning seasons. The tail end of Brian Billick's tenure, in fairness, was up and down. 9-7 in 2004, 6-10 in 2005, 13-3 in 2006, 5-11 in 2007. So they alternated winning seasons, losing seasons. Then he comes in 08 And then the first 5 years, they have a winning campaign. They make the playoffs. And in that fifth year, 2012, they ultimately get to the Super Bowl and win it. So he walked into a stable situation, which I think had a little bit more consistency, it's fair to say, than what he's inheriting here with the Giants. But there were still things that had to be tweaked when he took over in 2008. And what they were able to build over 18 years is quite impressive, because this is a league, and we've talked about this, Matt, on this show multiple occasions. It's a league defined by parity. It's a league defined by competitive balance. And we were talking on shows last week. Again, here we are in a year in which an average of 4 to 5 new teams make the playoffs every single year. And sometimes it goes as high as half the field. So that just proves to you, you could be a 10-7 team one year. Good luck guaranteeing to all of a sudden repeat that. Yet in Baltimore, 18 seasons he was the head coach, they made the playoffs 12 years. But I think what's also telling, and this is what I want to delve into in terms of one of our main themes on today's program. So I went back and I looked at all of his offensive coordinators and his defensive coordinators, Matt. He actually, believe it or not, he had 7 OCs and 7 DCs, the state of equilibrium, over the course of those 18 years. On offense, he had Cam Cameron, Jim Caldwell, who was the former head coach of the Colts and the Lions, Gary Kubiak, former head coach of the Texans, Denver too, Mark Trestman, former head coach of the Bears, brought in a lot of individuals that had been leaders of their own respective teams. Marty Mornhinweg, who was also on Andy Reid's staff in Philadelphia, Greg Roman, who was just let go by John's brother Jim with the Chargers, and then Todd Monken, who was his latest OC. Then on defensive side of the ball, he had Rex Ryan, right before Rex became the Jets head coach, Greg Madison, Chuck Pagano, former Colts head coach Dean Pease, highly respected defensive coordinator throughout the course of his career. Wink Martindale, who Giants fans know very well. Mike McDonald, who is now a win away from taking the Seahawks to the Super Bowl. And Zach Orr, his most recent DC. They had a top 10 offense 8 times in those 18 seasons. They had a top 10 defense 13 times in those 18 seasons. A lot of math here that I'm testing everybody with. They had a top 10 offense and defense in the same season 7 times in those 18 campaigns. And only once did they miss the playoffs when they had both a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. And this just goes to show you how competitive the league is. They went 9-7 that year. That was 2017. That was when Marty Mornhinweg had the 9th scoring offense in the NFL. Dean Pease had the 6th scoring defense. And I'll tell you, that's a very rare occasion. That reminds me of, if Giants fans recall, there was a year with Coughlin where the Giants went 10-6 and still missed the playoffs because they lost out on a tiebreaker. It happens. It's rare, but it does happen. So why do I bring this up, Matt? Well, and that's pretty good math in terms of the percentage of when you had a top 10 offense or a top 10 defense. But as we look ahead to the interviews that are going on right now, is John Harbaugh's trying to put a staff together. What this data and these results show me is he is effective in pinpointing somebody to come in and say, you're going to handle the offense, you're going to handle the defense. And more often than not, they have had positive results where you feel good about where your offense and defense is heading. It's not to say that everything was a straight line. There were years where they had the 25th ranked offense and the 24th ranked defense. For example, in 2015, they went 5-11. Nobody bats 1,000, okay, in any sport. Let's make that clear. But his track record is extremely impressive when you put it under the umbrella and the lens of how hard it is to do it year in and year out. So that's why I wanted to go over what he empowered individuals to do. And I'm not saying that he's bringing in any of these individuals, because a lot of these individuals have retired and are watching from the sidelines, rightfully so, after what they accomplished. But, you know, Todd Monken had a top 10 offense in 23 and 24. And as rough as last season went, they still finished 11th. And this is scoring offense, by the way. Yardage to me is irrelevant because that doesn't necessarily tell you all you want. And Zach Orr, the latest defensive coordinator, they were 9th in his first season in 24. They were 18th in 25. But remember, those last 2 seasons, they dealt with a lot of injuries. And you're going to deal with that over the course of an NFL season. The Giants have dealt with that. But once again, track record, I think, is very attractive based on what I just read through here, Matt, in terms of who he's empowered over the course of his career as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the spreadsheet that you made, there's 2 things that really stand out to me. For one, on defense, that is just an insane amount of success over 18 years.
A lot of red, by the way, for our audience. I put in red the years they were top 10.
Yeah, so of the 18 seasons, there were 5 where the Ravens did not have a top 10 defense, which means 13 of the 18 seasons, they had a top 10 defense. That's the first thing that stood out to me. Obviously, the history of this organization, the New York Football Giants, defense is, in our blood. Like, that's what carried us to basically all 4 Super Bowls.
Big identity.
Is always been the identity of this team. So bringing some of that defensive success to this organization, I think, is just a perfect match. And then on offense, obviously a little bit more mixed results. But to me, I'm sort of looking from 2018 on, because in 2018, obviously the Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying Jackson Dart and Lamar Jackson are exactly the same, because they're not. But there are some similarities to their games, and especially with how the NFL has evolved and, sort of the modern offense and the way that a lot of successful quarterbacks in the NFL today are those dual threat quarterbacks. I think it's more important to look at the years with Lamar Jackson than necessarily Joe Flacco, who is like a statue in the pocket. So since 2018, that's 8 seasons. They were top 10 offense in how many of them?
Top 10 offense, they were 8 times.
In 4 of the 8.
Oh, you're looking at just Lamar.
Just since 2018. In 4 of the 8. However, this past season, they finished 11th, and that was with Lamar missing a month of the season. And in Lamar's rookie season, he only started the last 7 games. So that was mostly Joe Flacco, and they finished 13th. And under Lamar, they finished 6-1 in the games that Lamar started. So we're really talking about 2 seasons of like full Lamar where they did not finish as a top 10 offense. And that is with 3 different offensive coordinators, 3 different offensive play callers. So that, I think, is a very good sign and just telltale for Jackson Dart. And obviously, whoever was brought in to be a head coach, their plan to develop Jackson Dart was a big talking point, of course, with every candidate that was brought in for an interview. That is the most important position in sports. His development is basically the most crucial thing to the success of this team moving forward. And John Harbaugh has a track record of being able to develop young quarterbacks. Joe Flacco, obviously, again, very different from Jackson Dart, but Joe Flacco had a pretty good stretch of success with the Ravens, including a Super Bowl championship. Sure. Lamar Jackson, John Harbaugh was there for all of Lamar's career up to this point. And that includes 2 league MVP awards, along with, again, a top 10 offense more years than not when he was actually out there. So I'm glad you did this, because I did not break it down, the various OCs and DCs that he's had during his tenure in Baltimore. But I think these stats alone should just give Giants fans a lot of confidence that whoever John Harbaugh decides to hire for those 2 very important positions, he knows what he's doing. Like, again, I know that goes without saying, because, again, he's had the amount of success that he's had over the last nearly 2 decades in Baltimore. But this data right here just is proof that whoever he tabs for those 2 positions, there's a reason for it, and will most likely help improve both of those sides of the ball pretty significantly from what we've seen the last couple of years.
Well, and the reason why I wanted to do this, and I think this conversation is maybe even more critical than dissecting the head coach on an island, is, and we're going to see 9 other teams hire head coaches, and some have already done. 10 openings this cycle. At the end of the day, it comes down to who is calling the plays on both sides. I would say more so than the CEO, because he's only having so much influence in the rhythm and flow of a game through what the quarterback does or the anchor of the defense. And even if you go back to Tom Coughlin empowering individuals like Kevin Gilbride and Steve Spagnuolo, if that doesn't happen, who's to say that the Giants win a pair of Super Bowls with Coughlin at the helm, or what Bill Parcells did with Bill Belichick running the defense? So even within the organization, it still comes down to who you hire under that umbrella, and who you hand the keys to the kingdom on offense and defense. before we open up the lines, the one other thing, though, I did want to add, and I agree with you, I think it maybe adds a little bit more substance to view what he did with Lamar because of the mobility and the athleticism and the development as it pertains to Jackson Dart. But I like the fact that on his resume, Matt, he has two completely different quarterbacks on opposite ends of the spectrum, and he brought in coordinators to tailor offenses to cater to their strengths. So the fact that he worked with Flacco, who is very different from Lamar, and that year in 2018 where there was the transition, they still managed to post the 13th best scoring offense in the NFL, even in a year where they were sort of experimenting. And I'll always remember, and I bring this example up, why, sometimes you don't want to experiment too much when you have it good under center. And we see the Saints have done this when Drew Brees was on the team. Taysom Hill, they'd have Drew Brees run out wide and he'll be under center. And you could tell like Drew was just a little uncomfortable. So there was one time, I believe in 18, I can't remember the game, but I remember it as if it was yesterday, where they had Lamar and Flacco in together, Matt. And Lamar was under center. They had Flacco go out wide. And you could just tell, like, Joe was out of his element. So it just goes to show you how opposite they are. But the fact that they were sort of toying with what would work, what's a good fit, and that year still put up 24 points per game and the 13th ranked offense, I think is another element worth at least throwing out there to show how Harbaugh was evolving himself from maybe old school football to new school football in terms of what Lamar brought to the table. And remember, there was a lot of critique too when Lamar was drafted. Some didn't know, would he be a quarterback? Could he play another position based on what he did with Louisville? And they turned him into a big offensive force. So, that can't be overlooked considering Jackson Dart is only going to be entering his second year in the NFL. So all of these factors, I think, bode very well in terms of what happened in Baltimore under the guidance of Harbaugh and how that could very well apply to the Giants. So I'm glad that we took the time to go over some of his offensive and defensive coordinators. And for those of you listening in, if you have some questions about a specific season, I hope we can answer them because I got the rankings, as Matt can attest to, right in front of me year in and year out in terms of what they were able to accomplish from that perspective. All right.
Go ahead. Even sticking just with Lamar for a second.
Sure.
You can sort of break his career down, even though he's only been 7.5 seasons, into kind of two different parts. The first 5 years and then the last 3 years, which the last 3 years just happened to coincide with Todd Monken taking over as the offensive coordinator in Baltimore. But the last 3 years, he became a lot more pass heavy than he was at the start of his career.
Yep.
And not only more pass heavy, but more efficient as a passer.
Which is the big key.
Yeah, his game as a passer took a significant step over these last 3 seasons. While the first few years of his career, of course, he had success. He led the NFL in passing touchdowns his second season, but he was running the ball and depending on his legs significantly, like a lot. And he obviously, rushing is still a huge part of his game these last 3 seasons, but he did lean more into the passing, which obviously we know all the drama surrounding Jackson Dart this past season with people saying he needs to, maybe run a little bit less and throw the ball a little more. Well, John Harbaugh has experience helping develop a quarterback and also change a guy that might be a little bit run first into turning him into pass first, run second. He has that success and pretty recently as well. So I just wanted to touch on
your
that.
point is well stated. Now, 2022, he only played 12 games, so you can understand why his pass attempts that year were down. But when healthy, he played 16 games in 23. He played 17 in 24. He had 457 pass attempts the first year, 474 the second year, and he completed 66 to 67% of his passes, which were career highs. The last time he was in that ballpark was his second year, the year you talked about where he had 36 passing touchdowns. Since then, and once again, he had been missing some games here or there, but he was hovering around 62, 63, 64, and there is a significant difference. You go from completing 64 passes to 67. I mean, just do the math. Think about what that does over the course of a year. Now, Jackson Dart had a very respectable completion percentage for a player in his first year, but the goal is you don't want it to fluctuate, Matt. You want it to stay consistent. I think that's going to be the task at hand for the offensive coordinator, as Jackson maybe doesn't run as much and the pass attempts go up, and of course the volume of games, because remember, Russell Wilson started in the early stages, so if assuming he'll stay healthy, he's going to have more at-bats. You want to get in that 66, 67 area so that you're at least feeling the efficiency of the offense is running smoothly, and it's not having to be based on the shoulder load of Jackson taking off and running a 40-yard dash.
Yeah, and in those 2 seasons that you highlighted of Lamar, 2023 and 2024, he won MVP in 2023, finished as the MVP runner-up in 2024 when a lot of people thought that he kind of deserved to win back-to-back MVPs, and was first-team All-Pro in both of those years. So he had 2 of the best seasons of his career. Obviously, he also won MVP in his second season, 2019, which was another phenomenal season, but the little more recently 2 years of him relying a little bit more on his arm than necessarily his legs while still running. It's not like he abandoned the run game at all. He still had over 100 rush attempts in both of those seasons, but he definitely, as you said, set new career highs in pass attempts, and by a pretty wide margin in those 2 years. And he wasn't only passing more, but his passing numbers all around took a big jump in a positive direction as well.
And remember, the point again is we are not comparing Lamar to Jackson and saying they're equivalent. I mean, Jackson's only played 1 year, not even one full season. The point is Harbaugh hiring individuals to help develop talent and raise their game. That's the whole point of this exercise. All right, with that being said, let's open up the phone lines as we move forward here at 201-939-4513. Lance Medow, Matt Citak with you here, Thursday's edition, Big Blue Kickoff Live. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants, as we appreciate everybody tuning in on Giants.com, YouTube, as well as the mobile app. Let's get things started with Diego in Las Vegas here on BBKL. What's happening, Diego?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing well.
Good.
What's on your mind?
How are you?
Doing pretty good. Doing great this morning because John Harbaugh's my coach. So, you can't be doing too bad. I just wanted to give a call because, obviously, there's a lot of big changes coming in the front office for the Giants currently, and I know you guys mentioned we're not celebrating anybody leaving, but sometimes change can be good, and I think John Harbaugh was really the only coaching candidate this cycle, and maybe in even future cycles that could really come in and make sweeping changes in the front office. So I think me along with many other Giants fans are really, really happy. We were finally able to, try to just change and move into a different direction. The question I have for you guys is, I kind of wanted to just get the vibe. You guys are obviously in the building every day, so I kind of wanted to just see if there's been kind of like a vibe shift in the building that you guys have noticed since John Harbaugh's been there. I know it's only been like a couple of days, but, just being around the building, do you guys notice, kind of an uptick in mood from people, or do you guys yourself notice a big vibe shift in the building? I'll take my question off air, so I appreciate you guys taking my call, and Giants Nation show for life.
All right, Diego. Appreciate the phone call.
Thank you, Diego.
Do you want to talk first?
Yeah, so, for starters, as Coach Harbaugh mentioned Tuesday, the building is undergoing some renovations and stuff.
Yeah.
And at some point, everything will be announced. Couldn't even tell you the details because I do not know them. But we don't have the cafeteria is closed right now.
So that brings people's moods down. You got to understand.
Well,
That's what I was going to say.
Not only that, but it's just that is a one spot where me and my department could interact a lot more with some of the
Sure.
the football side of the building and
you see everybody within the organization walk in and out. And
and there's
so
also
forth, yeah.
obviously just been so much going on the last couple of weeks that it's kind of hard to see anyone. Everyone's running around doing a million different things at once. I will say overall, yes, the mood is obviously pretty high right now. I think everyone in this building is ecstatic that the best coaching option out there in this coaching cycle chose to come be the head coach of this franchise, and has us hopefully heading in a direction that we've all been craving for over a decade now. So in that sense, yes, the vibes are definitely higher than I would say that they were, towards the end of this past season. I think that kind of goes without saying, though.
Yeah, I just would say, and that's where I was going to start. You took the words out of my mouth in terms of the construction going on. I think it's hard to, from a visual standpoint, put it in context just because there's some construction going on. But I think, if you have private conversations with individuals, I think that, there certainly is optimism and excitement. And I'll go back to what the last caller just mentioned, and it was an interesting point that there are very few individuals, I would agree, that could come in, get a new job, and all of a sudden be able to implement quick change. And that comes with, this goes back to the conversation you and I had, Matt, the track record of Harbaugh. 18 seasons in one place, a lot of winning, a Super Bowl victory. In life, people are willing to meet you halfway or three quarters when they know it's tangible evidence, right? You've been there, you've done that. If you've coached 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL and didn't have a wealth of success, it's hard for any management team to hand over and empower you to do that. So I would agree with the last caller. Harbaugh is in a bit of a league of his own. Maybe a Mike Tomlin you'd put in that same department as well in terms of candidates that were out there this cycle, but Tomlin's made it clear he could very well be done with coaching from what some of the reports indicate.
At the very least for this upcoming season.
Absolutely.
Sure sounds like.
But it was unique that 2 individuals like that who were knocking on the door of 2 decades with a team who had won the ultimate prize, who had proven to do it year in and year out, were available. Yeah, they could come into a new team and they can carry some weight. But that's not the norm in today's NFL, and I would even take it outside of the NFL. Even if you look at the NBA or whatever else that happens, Harbaugh, yes, he had some sway where most people can't go. So I think that's a very fair observation.
We do just real quick have a little bit of non-Giants but somewhat related breaking news. Just word came out that the Cowboys have chosen someone as their next defensive coordinator, Christian Parker. I only bring that up because obviously that is one of the teams out there that was looking to fill the defensive coordinator position. So again, we're not going to mention any names, but if a candidate that has been floated around as a potential option in this building, that's one suitor, one potential team that is now you can cross off the list for any of those candidates to end up at. So, well, and it's within the division.
I was going to say, yeah, so that's where I thought you were heading.
Well, that's it.
More so than Giants candidates, the fact that this is going to be a guy that the Giants are going to have to solve.
And he was
2
the
times.
Eagles secondary at coach and passing game coordinator. Obviously,
yep.
The Eagles have had pretty good success in the secondary the last couple of seasons. So.
Absolutely. Well, it helps when you have the talent too. But
oh, yeah.
I think what's interesting about this hire is, you don't necessarily see individuals that go from one team to another within the same division, even from a promotional standpoint. So not only is this going to be somebody that the Giants are going to see twice a year, Matt, but it's also somebody that's already familiar with a lot of the Giants personnel. Now, granted, the Giants are going to have different schemes and so forth, but somebody normally who gets a job as a defensive coordinator has to learn the division first, right? Has to get familiar with the players. This is unique because here's somebody that has been with the Eagles and has seen the Cowboys from afar. So meaning he knows the players that he's going to be coaching and also knows the Commanders and the Giants. So that's also, we were just talking about rare occasions with a guy like Harbaugh taking over. Well, I think this is a fairly rare occurrence, too, that you have a move within the division and somebody that knows the personnel. And something tells me that may have been something that Schottenheimer was looking for, that he really wanted to bring in somebody that had a foundation already within the NFC East.
Yeah, for sure. And while obviously I think that's probably a bit of a boost for the Cowboys, it is at least a little bit of a hit towards the Eagles and their defensive coaching staff. So
that good, Vic Fangio has one less guy to rely on.
Yeah, a little good and a little bad there. So
correct, yeah. Boy, we're really trying to balance all the scales here over the course of the program. All right, let's head back to the phone lines, and we've got Sal in Kansas with us. What's happening, Sal? What do you got for us?
Hey, how you guys doing, Lance, Matt?
Good.
Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Sure, well, thanks for making it.
So, I had a story about John Mara that I wanted to share with the team, and every time I tell it, I get goosebumps. But everything that he's going through, I thought it was a good time. And I moved out to Kansas about 25 years ago from Jersey, and of course an avid Giants fan. Anyway, the Giants were going to be playing Kansas City, so I had a couple of friends of mine, season ticket holders, come on out to Kansas City to watch the game. Unfortunately, the tickets that I was getting at the time, I was scammed, and I never received them. And so we just figured, we'll scalp, the day of the game. So anyway, it's the night before the game, and we're at a beautiful restaurant. It's myself, my wife, and my two friends. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden this guy walks by. He gets a table by himself. He's in the corner. And, the three guys, we're looking at one another like, who is that? We know, we see the face. Who is that? And so the our waiter comes over to us, and I said, who is that over there? And he says, I can't tell you. I said, well, guess what? Now you don't have a choice. And he says, it's Mr. John Mara. And we're like, oh, my gosh. We're like schoolgirls. We're like, oh, my gosh, we can't believe we didn't know him. I can't believe, blah, blah, blah. We don't know what we're going to do. We don't know what we're going to say. Mr. Mara gets up off his chair. He walks by us, just going someplace. He walks by us, and out of all the people at the table, the one that screams at the top of her lungs is my wife, and she says, "Mr. Mara." So he comes over to the table, and we're like schoolgirls. We don't know what to say. And he comes over, and we just had the greatest conversation talking about football and the weather and my moving out and all this other stuff. And he said, "You guys going to the game?" And I said, "No, unfortunately." I told him what happened with the tickets, and he said, "Well," he goes, "What's your cell phone number?" And I'm like, okay, so I wrote it down. My wife, knew my hand was shaking. She wanted to make sure it was the correct number, and I gave it to him. And he said, "Okay, Sal, I'll tell you what, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, somebody's going to call you." And guys, I'm sorry, I'm tearing up. I mean, I just love this guy. Anyway, he says, "Sal, someone at 9 o'clock is going to call you." So 9 o'clock, right on the button. They call me, and it's a gentleman, and he says, "Mr. Mara told me to give you a call. He told us that you needed tickets." And I'm like, "Yeah," and I told him what happened. He said, "Okay, where do you want to sit?" And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, good seats. I don't know what to tell, And he says, "Okay, I'll tell you what. Just go to the will call window tomorrow, and there'll be an envelope waiting for you." And I said, "Okay." So we went to the will call window, and I'm sorry, guys.
No, understandable.
There's an envelope there, and there's a bottle of champagne, and there's a little card to the champagne. He says, "Have this later after a sweet victory." And inside the envelope is a letter. I know it was a form letter, but it's from Mr. Mara. Telling us how he appreciates us being Giant fans. And guys, it was just an incredible day. And I just hope and pray that this man makes it through. And I just wanted to share that with everyone. So thanks for taking my call.
Well, Sal, we certainly appreciate you making the phone call and sharing that story. And, I mean, that goes back to, and we talk about the human element all the time. And, when we started off talking about Ronnie Barnes and how he'll stay with the organization but, have a new role, that, that's the backstory that gets overlooked when change does come about. So, certainly appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm sure a lot of other fans have plenty of other similar exchanges. I mean, John Mara is known for personally writing to fans and having letters sent out and taking it to heart. So that is not a surprising development at all, but it's certainly nice to hear that and for it to continue to resonate with him even to this day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story, Sal. That was touching. And again, I'm sure there's a good amount of you out there that might have some sort of similar story about Mr. Mara. I'm not going to get into anything specific, but I only have positive, stories and things to say about him as well. It has done a lot for me here in my, coming up on 7 years since I first started as an intern here. So thank you for sharing that. It meant a lot. Thank you, Sal.
Well, and just on a related note, I mean, bringing it back to the Harbaugh conversation, given, what John obviously is having to go through right now from a personal standpoint, for him to remain committed to this coaching search and be engaged in the interviews, as we heard, during the course of the press conference, and, the role that Chris played in driving to Baltimore to meet with John Harbaugh and Tom Coughlin setting up the meeting. I mean, that is an example of, this family is going to do above and beyond to make sure that they can get this right and put this franchise back on the right track. So, that also, I think, is an extremely telling sign Not to say that that doesn't go on in other walks of life and families that are invested in other companies, but they pretty much laid it all out on the line to do everything in their power to get John Harbaugh into this building, and that did come to fruition. And remember, I know the Bills didn't necessarily have an opening at the time, but there were 8 other teams that I'm sure would have been knocking down doors to at least just get a face-to-face meeting with John Harbaugh. And remember, he wound up, according to the reports, telling those other teams after he agreed to a handshake deal with the Giants that he wasn't even going to meet with them. So, they had to be aggressive. They were in the forefront, and they got it done. And this was an extremely competitive cycle because, Matt, this was unprecedented. I don't know the last time that there were 10 vacancies.
I think this tied... I want to say it tied the record.
I did, but I'm curious. I forgot the last time, though, it happened.
I believe, if I remember correctly, it was actually not that long ago. I want to say
it was recently?
2022, but again, tied the most ever in a cycle.
I mean, do the math. We're talking about that's nearly 1/3 of the NFL changed its coach this offseason.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And just real quick.
Sure.
You could go back to just what Coach Harbaugh himself said on Tuesday, because he said it multiple times. Mr. Mara played an absolutely crucial role in John Harbaugh deciding to be the head coach here. Coach Harbaugh wanted to come in part because of Mr. Mara. And I just don't want that, to be lost in all of this, because obviously with the lack of success around the team over the last decade, there have been a lot of things said, and just want to make that very clear. You don't have to take our word for it, because you can go watch the press conference from Tuesday, go read the transcript. Coach Harbaugh said it himself multiple times that coming to coach and work for Mr. Mara, work with him, played a very big role in him wanting to come to this organization.
Well, and the other thing before we reopen up the phone lines that I also think maybe gets lost is there are committees within the National Football League that owners serve on. And, that gives them an opportunity to interact with coaches as well as fellow owners. And John Mara, who has been a staple of the NFL community for a very long time, and even going back to his father, Wellington, he has interacted with the Harbaughs of the world over the years. And don't misinterpret that in saying that people understand his reputation even though they weren't part of the Giants organization. So John, who's been in the NFC East with the Eagles and through his father and through Steve Bisciotti, the owner of the Baltimore Ravens, who also has a very good relationship with John Mara, those channels also help when you're looking for a coach and you need somebody, Matt, to put in a good word or whatever it may be. Once again, I'm not spilling beans that are hidden behind closed doors. If you go back to other coaching searches, even in previous years, and John Harbaugh even said one of the first people he reached out to was Tom Coughlin. What do you do, right, when you're trying to get into an organization you're not familiar with? You speak to people that worked there previously, right, to get a firsthand glimpse of what you may potentially be walking into. And I also think Tom Coughlin deserves a lot of credit, by the way. I mean, considering the strong ties that he keeps with this team after he moved on from this franchise and still campaigning and helping out those backdoor channels. I think that also says a lot about Tom to this day too.
No, for sure. I mean, look, there's a reason why there's a saying around here: once a giant, always a giant. There's true meaning behind that.
All right, let's head back to the phone lines. We got Steven in Las Vegas with us here on BBKL. What's happening, Steven?
Hey guys, how you doing, Matt? How you doing, Lance?
Doing well, Steven.
How you doing?
Calling in.
What's on your mind?
I'm really excited, man. I'm a diehard Giants fan, and it's getting John Harbaugh. I haven't been this excited since Super Bowl 46. Couple questions for you.
Sure.
First of all, previous caller, man, I love John Mara. Hope he gets a speedy recovery. That man, his father, Wellington, face of the franchise. Now, with I hear we're talking about the coordinators. I keep hearing Todd Monken's name. On the defensive side, I know that they're doing a lot of shaking up. I'm hearing Charlie Bullen's going to be staying with the team. Who do you think is the favorite? Obviously, we don't know what's going on in the minds of John Harbaugh, but given everything that's going on in the league right now, who do you think the Giants are going to go for on the offensive side, as far as the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator? Because Shane Bowen, I mean, that was a disaster all those fourth quarter blown leads. I mean, we could have easily been 9-8 last year. And then my second question, and I'll take this off the air, is with the draft coming up, I heard I know we have the 5th pick. What do you think? Who do you think the Giants should draft? What position should they? I mean, I'm hearing offensive line. We have Andrew Thomas. Maybe we need somebody on the right side. Evan Neal was a bust. I'm happy we got some key players, but I just wanted to get your input on that. But thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Let's go Big Blue.
All right, Steven. Yeah, appreciate the call.
So for starters, for point one, as we said earlier, there's nothing we can discuss really with specifics in terms of the coordinators or the coaching staff other than John Harbaugh is the head coach of the New York Football Giants. Outside of that, everything, there's nothing official out there. Like we're not going to confirm or deny anything. So you can look into reports if you'd like, but until it comes an official announcement from the Giants, we're not going to be able to discuss anything, and certainly not any specifics. So that's all I'm going to say on part one. I know we did discuss some of John Harbaugh's previous coordinators in Baltimore before, but obviously that is just referring to the time in Baltimore. We don't know what's going to happen here. And just real quick on part two, I know we're almost exactly 3 months out from the 2026 NFL draft. I know with the season having ended just a couple weeks ago and everything that's happened since then, it's kind of wild to already be thinking about the draft. But, as we have come to learn, there's no real offseason in the NFL. Things move very, very quickly. I mean, I'm supposed to be heading down to Mobile, Alabama on Monday for the Senior Bowl. And so the Shrine Bowl practices start tomorrow. So we're already getting into all of this, lead up to the draft process. But up on Giants.com, actually today, Giants Now, the article that we try to do most days, Mel Kiper just put out his first mock draft yesterday morning. And he has the Giants taking Carnell Tate, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, with the number 5 pick. That seems to be, as of right now, a popular pick in mock drafts from these experts. Obviously, that's because Wan'Dale Robinson is, as of right now, heading towards free agency. Another, popular position being projected to the Giants is offensive tackle more specifically. There's the guy from Miami who is considered to be a top, as of right now, a top 5 or top 10 prospect. What happens with Jermaine Illuminor in free agency will potentially play a big role in whether or not that becomes a realistic option for the Giants at number 5. And also just given I would just say, I guess, the lack of success on defense over the last few years, you can't rule out basically anyone on defense. I would say the one position as of right now that I would maybe lean more towards the Giants not going after with the 5th pick would be edge rusher, just because you already have Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, and Kayvon Thibodeau. How much value is it using the 5th pick on a potentially 4th edge rusher in that group? But there's certainly players at other positions. There's Ohio State honestly has several guys that are projected to go in the top 10 between, there's Arvil Reese, who I don't even know if he'll be there at 5. There's Caleb Downs, the safety, in addition to Carnell Tate. So defense as well, just about anyone other than an edge rusher could be the target. It's a little hard to say 3 months out now exactly where the Giants are going to go in the draft, because free agency is going to play a big part in that. Between, the 3 big pending free agents for the Giants, there's Wan'Dale Robinson, Jermaine Illuminor, and Cordell Flott. If any of them are brought back, then their position becomes less of a need in the draft. There's also obviously just free agency in general, where there have already been at least reports that the Giants could potentially look at some of the pending free agents from Baltimore, guys that obviously John Harbaugh has plenty of familiarity with. So who gets brought in the next, I would say, 2 months will go a long way in helping determine where the Giants might go in the draft come April.
Just to give you an idea, and because of the Ravens' consistency, they were not drafting very high during John Harbaugh's tenure. But if you want to just look at maybe the coach's philosophy or thinking, they did have a top 10 pick in 2016. They took Ronnie Stanley on the offensive line. And Stanley, has been an interchangeable tackle. So, the reason I bring that up is sometimes people would argue, well, would you use a top 5 pick on somebody that may be going into the right side of the offensive line as opposed to the left side because they have Andrew Thomas? And my argument is, if you look at today's NFL, first of all, every team's got pretty much 2 great pass rushers. So it really doesn't make a difference from a value standpoint if you're lining up a guy on the left side or the right side because you need 2 bookends. So it really is silly to say, oh, well, if he's not going to be an anchor on the left side, why are you using a high pick? Well, you can have a great left tackle. Your right side is issues, and your quarterback is running for his life. So if you think a tackle warrants a top 5 pick and you're going to put him to start at right tackle, I personally have no problem with that. If they want to go in that direction.
I mean, all you got to do is look at the Chargers, who between the 2022 and 2024 draft, they used 2. Not Joe Alt was 5th pick, and Rashawn Slater was a little bit further, but still top 13 pick.
Sure.
2 top of the first half of the round picks on the 2 tackle positions, and we saw in Los Angeles this past season with both of those guys getting hurt, just how detrimental it was to the Chargers and their offense and the offensive line in general. So yeah, speaking of just like looking back at Baltimore's draft history, over the last 10 years, the Ravens have also drafted a wide receiver in the first round 4 different times in the last decade. So clearly, taking a wide receiver at 5, if John Harbaugh, the front office, the coaching staff agree that the best player available at the 5th pick is a wide receiver, I don't think there will be any hesitation that will then be the pick. And I think that goes for just about any position. Whoever is the top player on the board when the Giants get on the clock in 3 months from now, that is who I think they're going to pick almost regardless of position.
The receivers that Matt was referencing, Brashad Perryman, then you had Marquise Hollywood Brown, you also had Rashad Bateman, and you had Zay Flowers. Those were the 4, all different picks in terms of where they were within the first round. And Wan'Dale Robinson and Jermaine Illuminor. See, this is why you got to let free agency play out before we really take a deep dive into the draft, because what's going to happen with both of those players will absolutely influence the thinking and the direction of that 5th overall pick. And we could see both of those positions warrant consideration at 5. We could see one. We could see none of them, depending on what happens in free agency. The other thing I wanted to tackle was with respect to the question about coaches. And once again, we're not addressing any specific report, but I will say this. I think from a trend perspective, coaches tend to lean on familiarity. It's not to say that Harbaugh's going to bring over multiple assistants from Baltimore, but it wouldn't surprise me, since he's been invested in those individuals over the last years, if he turns back to coordinators even. And we said Todd Monken and Zach Orr were the last 2 coordinators. Right now, the Ravens are looking for a new head coach, so their staff is up in the air. But it's important to understand this. In the NFL, you can block an assistant who's still under contract from making a lateral move. So you may have seen some reports related to this, meaning if the Ravens have a coordinator or an assistant coach that would then go to another team, I'm just talking hypothetically speaking, that would have the same title, the Ravens have the right to block that. The rules changed in 2020. If you remember, Matt, in 2018 when Pat Shurmur took over as the head coach, he wanted to bring Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota. That would have been a promotion because Stefanski was the QB coach. He would have went to OC, but then the NFL teams could block even promotions. Now you can only block lateral moves. And this also brings me to a Twitter question we're getting. This is from Aiden, which is a fair question. And this is not a specific assistant. This is a generic question. How does it work for the previous assistant coaches after a change is made at head coach? Do all of their contracts automatically expire, or how does it work? It's a very interesting question. To my understanding, if you are an assistant coach and you're under contract, if you then get a job with another team, then it's similar to head coaches. There's offset language, which means the team that you now went to, whatever your salary is, it's a matter of whatever the difference is, may need to be handled by the team. But they prevented double dipping. That's what they don't want to happen in the NFL, meaning you're under contract with one team, you get a contract with another team, and you're getting paid by both. That doesn't happen. So that, I hope, answers your question. There's offset language. So if any Giants assistant who is not retained gets another gig elsewhere, the Giants would not necessarily be on the hook for that full salary. But we don't need to sit here and go over the details, but that's the at least structure and how it works.
Yeah, but also like their contracts don't just automatically expire. It's not like all of a sudden they become free agent coaches.
Absolutely.
It's up to the new head coach to decide the coaches that are still under contract who he wants to retain on the new staff. Sometimes even as they're figuring that process out, the assistant coaches are allowed to start pursuing other jobs sometimes. We don't know what the exact situation is with the Giants here, but just to answer Aiden the question specifically, no, they don't. The contracts don't automatically expire, but it does come down to the new head coach. He gets to sort of talk with all of the assistants and decide who he wants to retain and who he's going to then let go to allow to pursue other positions.
And there may be some that don't get new jobs and may not be retained, and they still remain under contract with the Giants. So that means that if anything else came up during the season, you'd have to get permission from the Giants for that assistant to pursue another job. Case in point, and this has been reported, and this is unrelated to the Giants, but it spells out, Matt, what you and I are talking about. Mike Tomlin is remaining under Steelers' control, even though he has stepped aside as the head coach. That means that, hypothetically speaking, if Tomlin decided next season he wanted to be the head coach of another team, the Steelers have to grant that team permission, A, to speak with him, and there would have to be potentially trade compensation that would have to be worked out. If you recall, Sean Payton, it was the same thing.
Yep.
He stepped away from the Saints. Denver needed to work out a trade because Sean was still under contract with New Orleans. So very similar in terms of how assistants work. And that's generic speaking. We're not talking about any specific individual. All right, let's try to squeeze in another phone call before we wrap up shop here. Jack is in Pennsylvania, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Jack?
Oh, hi, guys. It's my first time calling. I grew up a New York Giants fan, but now I moved out to PA, and all the Eagles fans make fun of me, but hopefully it won't happen anymore. I had a question about the linebacker position. So I think it's kind of an under-addressed position, I think, of need. And, people like McFadden, who are, he's looking to get re-signed, his contract coming up, and Okereke, if we cut him, we could save around $9 million. I was wondering, how do you guys think we should address the linebacker position, through the draft or free agency?
All right, we'll let you go on that note, Jack. Appreciate the phone call.
Thank you, Jack. For starters, you bring up a good point that you got to look at the linebackers that are at least currently on January 22nd under contract, which is Bobby Okereke, who else? Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, Darius Muasau.
Because he's still on a rookie deal.
He's still on his rookie deal.
Yeah.
I believe Chris Board, who I know didn't get to play much this year because
former Raven,
of an
by
injury.
the way, too.
Former Raven, special teamer, but obviously a linebacker as well. And then I believe there's Swayze Bozeman was signed to a reserve future deal. So, yeah, that is certainly a position where you can expect some moves to be made, some guys brought in, because, right now you don't have enough linebackers to get through training camp with, so there will be more guys added. It's obviously a crucial position, and it is one that, again, we just keep looking back at what the Ravens did because that's somewhat of a good blueprint to use. A lot of those good Ravens defenses we discussed had that anchor in the middle of the defense, like that
Ray Lewis.
Even more recently, I'm thinking
Roquan Smith right now, who's excellent. Yeah. Who they acquired via trade from the Bears.
There was Patrick Queen at one point.
Sure. It's another one. Went to the Steelers.
Had the middle linebacker position has not been one that's been overlooked in Baltimore. So I would expect some resources to be put towards that position. I do think towards the end of the season, we saw more of the Bobby Okereke that we saw in his first season with the Giants than maybe what we saw last year and for a good chunk of this season. I do think towards the end of the season, he played a lot better than earlier in the year. But yeah, I would expect, and I can't say whether it's going to be a free agent or a lot in the draft. To be honest, I don't know who are the top free agent linebackers that are going to hit the market. And there still needs to be, roster moves made, to clear some more cap space in order to even potentially pursue any even, somewhat big free agent players, period, regardless of position. So it's a little too early to say. I threw out the name Arvil Reese before just because he's currently at least projected to be a top 5-ish pick. He's one of the best overall players in this upcoming draft, and he does play the linebacker position, which could be a position that the Giants pursue in some degree this offseason.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Matt is saying, two things. Number one, who's the new defensive coordinator, regardless of what Harbaugh thinks about personnel they used in Baltimore. Also, what's the alignment? Are they going to be playing a 3-4? Is it a 4-3? Remember, that then impacts how many linebackers you need, at least on your early downs. And I'll throw another caveat out. how does the new defensive coordinator, Matt, envision utilizing Abdul Carter, who has experience at the linebacking position?
Yeah.
Does he want to play him more in how he was utilized at Penn State? Does he utilize him only as an edge rusher? Remember, we saw when Charlie Bullen took over, Carter started to move back a little bit to other variations. That then is another tool in the shed that maybe you didn't think you'd had based on where you're going to line him up. So I'm throwing out a lot of factors, not to dance around the question, but there is a little bit of unknown. And I've always said this about the linebacker position, and this is why I don't think the Giants have gone the conventional route of addressing that position. You got to go back to, once again, our colleague Carl Banks in 1984. It's because why would you draft a middle linebacker high and you then take him off the field on third down? It doesn't serve a lot of value to me, Matt. Meaning, if you're going to draft a linebacker, he's got to be an absolute stud on all three downs without any hesitation. He's good at stopping the run. You have no questions about him in coverage. So sometimes you can better tackle that in free agency based on what you've seen, how an individual was utilized in a previous team, than maybe projecting that out of college football. But Abdul Carter and his versatility gives them at least some flexibility for whoever the new DC is in terms of how much volume they need at that position.
Yeah, and I just did very quick research. Just Pro Football Focus put out a article of their top 10 defensive free agents this coming off season.
And how many linebackers?
Obviously, this could change with, franchise tag extensions before free agency, but at least as of right now, of their top 10 free agents on defense, 5 of them are linebackers. Half of the list. I don't need to go into names. You guys can look it up yourself if you want. But if the Giants do decide, we want to bring in a veteran to either, to anchor down the middle of the defense, there certainly are some intriguing and talented options that should or could be available come free agency in March.
And of course, one of the key things that you said is this is pre-franchise tag.
Yes.
That's the other thing with free agency. You think guys are going to be out there, and all of a sudden a team says, not so fast, because I see one name out there, and I won't delve into it. And I think that team would be quite smart to keep that guy in the fold, considering what he did to help turn around that franchise this season. But that certainly gives them some options through free agency, through the draft, and some in-house candidates. But once again, it starts with who's the DC and what their alignment is going to be. I think that's the first order, and then everything else will fall into place after that. All right, that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Certainly appreciate everybody tuning in. As you can check out the archive of this show, our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcast. We have been broadcasting for the Giants Podcast Studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. We'll be back up and running again, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, here on BBKL. For Matt Citak, I'm Lance Medow, signing off on Giants.com. Have a good one.